Alrighty, the first thing we're going to do is come in here to our Gulp file and create our server watch. So down here, I'm going to do this after our dev server build. I'm going to say function dev server watch, and he's not going to take in a callback. He doesn't need a callback. And all he's going to do is he's going to say dev server webpack watch. Now, watch has a very similar signature to run, except it expects the first parameter to be some options for how to watch. We're just going to pass in an empty object for its first argument because we don't need to specify any additional watch parameters. Then what I'm going to do is pass in for the second argument, I'm going to pass in the same sort of callback that you saw with dev server build, which will take in an error and stats. And for this, I'm going to say output webpack dev server followed by error, followed by stats. And that's it. I'm not going to call this callback I'm not even taking in a callback, but I'm not going to do a callback because we are not wanting to ever terminate this. We want this to go continue forever, basically. After that, our dev server watch isn't actually going to be exposed directly from our Gulp file, so we need another private task for our reload. And the way I'm going to do the reload is I'm going to use our Gulp nodemon package. So I'm going to say dev server reload, and he's simply going to say return money.nodemon. And we're going to pass in some parameters to nodemon. So just like how nodemon on the command line takes in a script, so does the Gulp nodemon plugin. And this is going to be script, which is going to be colon, and it's simply going to be build server.js or whatever. And then I'm going to say watch the build directory. And then I'm going to say, I don't need to ignore anything actually in this particular case because I'm only watching the build directory. And then I'm going to say env. For env, I'm going to pass in two environment variables. I'm going to say node_env is development. I'll explain these in a second. And then I'm going to say use webpack to true as a string. So the env argument passes in these environment variables to the script that we're going to run. And I want node_env to be always set to development when we run this reload script. And I'm also passing in this other environment variable. This environment variable actually doesn't do anything yet. It's not some magical flag that we pass into Webpack or whatever. It's something we're going to use. The reason we're going to use it is like what you saw before. The server is responsible for compiling our client-side scripts. We accomplish that by using the Webpack dev middleware to serve out our scripts. And we do this for a variety of reasons. It reduces complexity and it is super fast and pretty easy to set up. And this flag, this environment variable, will be picked up by our server, and our server will say, okay, are we using Webpack? Then sure, go ahead and create this Webpack middleware. Otherwise, serve up pre-built files, which we'll see how to make those production files later. But for now, we're just working on, from our server perspective, he just needs to know to be able to serve, whether or not to serve out the client scripts or not. Are we in development or are we in production? So I'm using this flag here. This flag should only ever be set to true in development. It should not be set to true in production. The Node Webpack dev middleware is not meant for production. But now that we have our dev server watch and our dev server reload, which our dev server reload will watch the build folder, and if any file in the build folder changes, it'll relaunch that process. The dev server watch will use Webpack's awesome, super efficient watching algorithm to determine if anything changed, and if it did, it'll rebuild the server. So now that we have that, let's go ahead and build our public task for this. So up here, I'm going to create, underneath dev server, I'm going to say gulp task, and I'm just going to do dev. And gulp task dev is going to have a gulp series of clean of everything, followed by a server build, dev server build, followed by a gulp parallel of server watch, dev server watch, and dev server reload. So let me format this so the pipeline makes a little bit more sense. We do a gulp series on clean and dev server build. Then we do a gulp parallel on dev server watch and dev server reload. So what's going to happen is when we invoke this task, clean is going to be run synchronously. Then we're going to build our server synchronously. And then we're going to spool up dev server watch and dev server reload at the same time in parallel. And that's the pipeline. So now I can come over here to my console window. Let's clear this nonsense out. And I can say gulp dev and just hit enter. And check this out. It cleans, it builds, and then nodemon starts. Now you want to check out something awesome here? Watch what happens. Let's go ahead and move this over to the side here. And then bring this over here. Maybe expand this a little bit. Let's come into source server.js, and let's say, let's actually fix the spelling mistake and hit Control S. Okay, close, but not quite. So our server built. Let's verify that our server built. Let's see if from server was corrected here. It did build. Let's try changing that one more time. Okay, nodemon just freaked out, I think, on the first call. Now it's working. Let's verify that behavior real fast. So I'm going to Control C that out, and I'm going to start it again. Let's make sure that nodemon is doing the right thing. Yes. Okay, it was an isolated thing. Sometimes watchers don't pick up on file changes, and in that case, we just had a little hiccup there. But check that out. So now I'm in my source server, and I can come in here and I can just do whatever. I can fix up all my server code. I can write the thing, whatever. Hit Control S, and that whole pipeline just starts. We build the server, and then we launch the server. And this is the most effective, efficient sort of developer workflow that I can possibly think of. You just come in here, type, hit Control S, and a rather large and complicated process goes out behind the scenes with Webpack doing all its awesome things. But at the end of the day, what we get back is the one single file that is being watched. And obviously those build times are going to increase, but not by much. Notice how the first build took 846 seconds, the second one took 236 seconds, and the subsequent ones took between 50 and 62 milliseconds. So you can see that by using webpack.watch, our build times are so incredibly low. But that's it. That is our server setup. So it didn't take too long to put together. And I can come back here to my gulpfile.babel and just sort of scroll down it. I mean, we only have, maybe 74 lines of code. And we already have this awesome workflow that we're going to be using throughout the rest of the series. And this is something that you can easily copy and paste into any project that you want. But with that out of the way, I guess we'll see you guys in the next video when we start talking about how we're going to build our client. And we'll see you guys then.